Adrian Knight fled to the Maldives to escape his past, but fate had other plans. When he spotted Naomi, the woman he let go 8 years ago, his world tilted. But nothing shook him more than the little girl beside her, staring at him with his own eyes. "Hi, Daddy," she said. "Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today." Adrian Knight stood on the pristine white sand, taking in the turquoise water stretching out before him. The Maldives had seemed like the perfect escape, far from New York, far from the stress of running his tech empire, and far from anything that reminded him of his past. "Another drink, Mr. Knight?" asked a resort staff member, approaching with a tray. Adrian nodded, taking the coconut cocktail. "Thank you." At 42, Adrian had everything money could buy. His company, Knight Innovations, had revolutionized the security software industry, making him a fortune that allowed him to stay at exclusive resorts like this one whenever he needed to clear his head. But despite the luxury surrounding him, Adrian couldn't shake the emptiness that had followed him for years. Success had come, at a price. No real connections, no family, just business associates and brief relationships that never went anywhere. He took a long sip of his drink and pulled out his phone, checking his emails out of habit. His assistant had promised to handle everything during his 2-week vacation, but old habits died hard. "Mr. Knight, there's a call for you at the front desk," another staff member said, approaching him. "They say it's urgent." Adrian sighed. Even here, work found him. He followed the young man back toward the resort's main building, his bare feet sinking into the warm sand. As he walked along the beach, something caught his eye. A woman sitting under a palm tree, reading a book. Something about her profile made his heart stop. He froze mid-step, staring. It couldn't be. The woman lowered her book and turned slightly, revealing her face. Naomi Carter. Adrian felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. 8 years had passed since he'd last seen her, but he'd recognize her anywhere. The same honey-brown skin, the same full lips, the same dark curls falling around her shoulders, though they were shorter now. His first instinct was to turn around and walk the other way. He wasn't prepared for this, not here, not now. "Sir, the call?" the staff member reminded him. "Tell them I'll call back," Adrian said, his voice tight. The man nodded and walked away, leaving Adrian standing there, unable to move, unable to look away from Naomi. She hadn't seen him yet. He could still escape. He could go back to his private villa, pack his things, and be on his private jet within hours. He'd built his life around avoiding situations exactly like this one. Unexpected, uncontrolled, emotional. Just as he was about to retreat, Naomi looked up. Their eyes met across the sand. Her expression shifted from surprise to shock. The book slipped from her hands. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the years between them seeming both endless and non-existent all at once. Then, Naomi stood up, her white beach dress flowing around her legs. She looked the same, yet different, more mature, more confident, even more beautiful than he remembered. "Adrian," she said, her voice carrying across the beach. He couldn't respond, his mouth had gone dry. Naomi took a step toward him, and Adrian instinctively took a step back. This was too much. He turned, ready to walk away, to run if he had to. "Mommy." "Who's that?" The small voice stopped him in his tracks. Adrian turned back slowly. A little girl about 7 years old had appeared from behind a nearby cabana. She had dark curly hair pulled into 2 puffs on top of her head and was wearing a bright yellow swimsuit. But it was her face that made Adrian's world tilt on its axis. She had his eyes, his nose, the dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. That was identical to his own. "Hi," the little girl called out, waving at him with a friendly smile. Adrian couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His mind raced, doing the math. 8 years since he and Naomi had broken up. This child looked about 7. "Zoe, sweetie, come here," Naomi said, her voice tight with panic as she reached for her daughter's hand. The little girl skipped over to her mother, but kept her curious eyes on Adrian. "Who is he, Mommy?" "He looks like the man in the picture you keep in your special box." Naomi's face paled. "Zoe, please go find Aunt Lisa at the pool. Tell her I need her." "But Mommy." "Now, Zoe." The little girl pouted but obeyed, walking toward the resort's pool area. As she passed, "Adrian," she smiled up at him. "Hi, Daddy." Adrian felt like he'd been struck by lightning. His knees nearly buckled beneath him. Daddy, she knew. How did she know? Naomi rushed forward, grabbing her daughter's hand. "Zoe, I told you to go to Aunt Lisa." "But that's him, isn't it?" Zoe said, looking up at her mother with innocent eyes. "That's my daddy from the pictures. You said I'd meet him someday." Adrian found his voice at last. "Naomi, what is this?" Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Zoe, please go to Aunt Lisa now. I need to talk to Mr. Knight alone." The little girl looked between the two adults, clearly confused, but finally nodded and walked away, glancing back over her shoulder. Several times, when she was out of earshot, Adrian stepped closer to Naomi, his hands shaking. "Is she mine?" Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, then looked directly at him. Yes. That one word shattered Adrian's carefully constructed world. 7 years, he said, his voice breaking. "She's 7 years old and you never told me?" "I tried to tell you," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I found out I was pregnant, I called your office dozens of times. Your assistant always said you were unavailable. So you gave up." Adrian's shock was turning to anger. "You were carrying my child, and you just gave up trying to reach me?" "I wrote you letters," Naomi shot back, her own anger flaring. "I emailed you. I even came to your office once, but your security team escorted me out. You made it very clear after we broke up that you wanted nothing to do with me." Adrian ran his hands through his hair, trying to process this bombshell. "You should have tried harder. This is my daughter, Naomi. My daughter, and I've missed 7 years of her life." "Don't you dare put this all on me," Naomi said, her voice low but intense. "You're the one who walked away. You're the one who chose your company over us. You made it impossible for me to reach you." Adrian paced back and forth on the sand, his mind reeling. He looked toward the pool area where the little girl, Zoe, had disappeared. "How does she know who I am?" he asked finally. Naomi sighed. "I've always shown her pictures of you. I've never lied to her about who her father is. I told her that you're a very busy, important man who lives far away." "But not that I didn't know about her," Adrian said, the realization hitting him hard. "How could I tell her that? That her father didn't know she existed? She'd think you didn't care enough to find out about her." Adrian felt a stab of pain at those words. "I would have cared. I would have—" He trailed off, not sure what he would have done. 8 years ago, he had been laser-focused on building his company, pushing everything else aside, including Naomi. "What are you even doing here?" he asked suddenly. "Vacation," Naomi said simply. "Lisa, my sister, she won this trip at a charity auction. We never imagined we'd run into you here." Adrian shook his head, still struggling to believe this was happening. "What do we do now?" Naomi wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know. This isn't how I planned for you two to meet." "You planned for us to meet?" Adrian asked, surprised. "Of course," Naomi said. "I always intended to tell you eventually, when Zoe was older. She deserves to know her father, Adrian. Despite everything. Between us, I never wanted to keep her from you forever." Adrian looked out at the ocean, his thoughts as turbulent as the waves. He had a daughter, a beautiful, bright-eyed little girl who had called him Daddy without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting to say that word to him her whole life. "I want to know her," he said finally, his voice firm. "I want to be part of her life." Naomi nodded, slowly. "I think she'd like that. And what about you?" Adrian asked, looking directly at her. "Where do you fit in all this?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I'm her mother, Adrian. I've been both parents to her for 7 years. That doesn't change just because you've suddenly appeared." "I wasn't planning to change that," Adrian said defensively. "I just want to know where we stand, what we tell her, how we move forward. We focus on Zoe," Naomi said. "She's the priority here, not our past. Their past." The words hung between them, heavy with unresolved feelings and painful memories. "Mommy!" Zoe's voice called out as she ran back across the sand, followed by a woman who looked like an older version of Naomi. Her sister, Lisa, Adrian presumed. Zoe stopped in front of them, looking up at Adrian with undisguised curiosity and excitement. "Are you really my daddy?" Adrian knelt down so he was at eye level with her. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. It was like looking at a female version of his childhood photos. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am." Zoe's face broke into a wide smile, revealing the same dimple that Adrian saw in his own mirror every day. Without warning, she threw her arms around his neck in a tight hug. Adrian froze for a moment, then slowly wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her for the first time. Something broke open inside him, a wall he'd built years ago, crumbling, in the face of this small, perfect person who was a part of him. Over Zoe's shoulder, he met Naomi's eyes. There were tears streaming down her face as she watched them. Lisa stood beside her sister, her expression a mixture of shock and wariness. "So you're the famous Adrian Knight," she said, crossing her arms. Adrian stood up, keeping a hand on Zoe's shoulder. "And you must be Lisa." "Aunt Lisa, this is my daddy," Zoe announced proudly. "He came to find us just like in the stories." Lisa raised an eyebrow at Naomi, who shook her head slightly. "Zoe, honey," Naomi said gently, "Mr. Knight, your father, didn't to know we would be here. This is a coincidence." "A big coincidence," Lisa muttered. "The biggest," Adrian agreed, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. "I'm staying at the resort for 2 weeks. How long will you be here?" 10 days, Naomi answered. "We just arrived yesterday." Adrian looked down at Zoe, who was beaming up at him. "Then we have some time to get to know each other, don't we?" "We build a sandcastle?" Zoe asked immediately. "And go swimming, and can you show me how to snorkel? Mommy said I'm too little, but if you help me—" "Zoe," Naomi interrupted, "Mr. Knight, your father, probably has plans for today." "Actually," Adrian said, "I just cleared my schedule." He smiled at Zoe. "I'd love to build a sandcastle with you." Zoe jumped up and down with excitement. "Can we start now? Please, Mommy." Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "For a little while, but then we need to let your father have some time to himself." This is a big surprise for him too. As Zoe ran to get her beach toys from their cabana, Lisa pulled Naomi aside. Adrian could hear her whispered concerns. "Are you sure about this, Nay? After everything he put you through?" "It's not about me," Naomi whispered back. "It's about Zoe. She deserves to know her father." Adrian pretended not to hear, instead walking down to the water's edge. His mind was still reeling. This morning, he had been Adrian Knight, self-made, millionaire with no attachments and no responsibilities beyond his company. Now he was a father. Now he had a daughter. And somehow, after all these years, he was face to face with the only woman who had ever truly mattered to him, the woman he had pushed away because he'd been too afraid to let love interfere with his ambitions. Zoe returned with a bucket and shovel, pulling Adrian from his thoughts. "I picked the perfect spot," she declared, pointing to a flat area of sand near the water. "Have you built sandcastles before, Daddy?" The words sent a jolt through Adrian's heart. "Many years ago," he said, kneeling beside her on the sand. "But I think it's like riding a bike. You never really forget how." As they began to build, Adrian glanced up to see Naomi watching them from a distance, her expression unreadable. So many questions hung between them, so many years lost. But here, on this unexpected day, on this beach halfway around the world from home, something new had begun. Something that would change all their lives forever. Adrian smiled as Zoe showed him how to pack sand just right for the castle walls, her small hands guiding his larger ones with surprising authority. "You're really good at this," he told her. "Mommy says I'm good at everything I try," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "She says, I get that from you." Adrian looked up in surprise, meeting Naomi's eyes across the beach. She had told their daughter good things about him despite everything. In that moment, amid the shock and the anger and the confusion, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the family he never knew he wanted had been waiting for him all along. The next morning, Adrian woke up early in his luxury villa. He had barely slept, his mind replaying yesterday's events over and over. He had a daughter, a bright, beautiful 7-year-old girl who had his dimple, his eyes, and apparently, according to Naomi, his determination. He reached for his phone and pulled up the photo he had taken of Zoe yesterday while they were building their sandcastle. Her smile was wide, her dark curls framing her face, sand covering her small hands. His heart squeezed in his chest. 7 years. He had missed 7 years of her life. Adrian got up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfect blue ocean. After they had finished the sandcastle, Naomi had insisted it was time for Zoe's nap. They had agreed to meet for dinner at the resort's beachfront restaurant, giving Adrian time to process everything. But he hadn't processed anything. He was still in shock. His phone rang, and he saw his assistant's name on the screen. David had been calling repeatedly since yesterday, probably with some crisis at the company that needed Adrian's immediate attention. For the first time in years, Adrian hit decline. Whatever was happening at Night Innovations would have to wait. At 7 o'clock, Adrian arrived at the restaurant. He spotted Naomi, Lisa, and Zoe already seated at a table near the water. Zoe saw him first and waved excitedly. "Daddy, over here!" Several other diners turned to look, curious about the child calling out to the famous businessman, whose face occasionally appeared in financial magazines. Adrian smiled and walked over, suddenly feeling nervous. "Good evening," he said, pulling out the empty chair next to Zoe. "I saved this seat just for you," Zoe told him proudly. "Mommy said you might be busy, but I knew you'd come." Adrian glanced at Naomi, who gave him a small smile. "I told her you're a very busy man, but she was determined to wait for you." "I'm glad she did," Adrian said, sitting down. "I wouldn't have missed it." Lisa, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "So, Adrian, this is quite the coincidence, you being at the same resort." There was suspicion in her tone, and Adrian understood why. From her perspective, he was the man who had broken her sister's heart and then suddenly appeared in their lives again. "Pure coincidence," Adrian assured her. "My assistant booked it. I just told him I wanted somewhere quiet and exclusive." "Daddy, look what I made you," Zoe interrupted, pulling a piece of paper from her small purse. It was a crayon drawing of a tall man with black hair standing next to a little girl. "It's us," she explained. "Mommy helped me with the spelling." Above the figures, in childish handwriting, were the words, "Me and my daddy." Adrian swallowed hard, taking the drawing carefully. "This is beautiful, Zoe, thank you. I'll keep it forever." "Forever is a very long time," Zoe said seriously. "Yes, it is," he agreed, tucking the drawing into his jacket pocket. "But that's how long I'll keep it." A waiter came to take their orders, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. Zoe dominated the discussion, telling Adrian all about her school in Boston, her best friend Lily, her pet goldfish named Bubbles, and her dream of becoming an astronaut, or maybe a veterinarian, or maybe both. Adrian soaked in every detail, trying to build a picture of the 7 years he had missed. "She's in the gifted program at school," Naomi mentioned, during a rare moment when Zoe was focused on her food. "Top of her class in math and science." Pride swelled in Adrian's chest. "Just like her mother," he said, remembering how Naomi had been studying bioengineering when they met. "And her father," Naomi added softly. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment it was like no time had passed at all. Adrian remembered the first time he had seen Naomi at a university fundraiser where his company was being honored. For a scholarship program they had established, she had been a graduate student presenting her research, brilliant and passionate and completely unimpressed by his wealth or status. It had taken him weeks to convince her to go out with him, and months before she truly let her guard down. But when she did, when she finally trusted him with her heart, it had been the happiest time of his life, until his company faced a crisis and he had to choose between saving the business he had built from nothing and the relationship. That meant everything. He had chosen wrong and he had regretted it every day since, though he'd never admitted that to anyone, even himself. "Daddy, can you take me swimming tomorrow?" Zoe asked, breaking the moment between her parents. "I want to see the fish, but Mommy says I need a grown-up to go with me." "Well, your mother is right about that," Adrian said. "The ocean can be dangerous." "So will you take me?" Zoe pressed. "Please? You're a grown-up." Adrian looked at Naomi, silently asking permission. "We have a snorkeling trip booked for tomorrow morning," Naomi said. "If you'd like to join us, you're welcome to." "I'd like that very much," Adrian said. After dinner, they walked along the beach. Zoe ran ahead, chasing the tiny ghost crabs that emerged at night, giving Adrian and Naomi a chance to talk privately. "She's amazing, Naomi," Adrian said. "You've done an incredible job with her." Naomi smiled, watching her daughter. Say it easy, she's such a good kid. She called me daddy so easily," Adrian said, still amazed by this. "Like she's been waiting to say it her whole life." "She has," Naomi admitted. "Ever since she was old enough to understand what a daddy is, she's been asking about you. I've shown her pictures, told her stories." "Good stories, it seems," Adrian said. "She doesn't seem to hate me." Naomi stopped walking and turned to face him. "I would never make our daughter hate her father, Adrian. Whatever happened between us has nothing to do with her." Adrian took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Naomi, for how things ended between us, for not being reachable when you tried to tell me about her." "Yes, you do," Naomi agreed, not making it easy for him. "But that's a conversation for another time. Right now, we need to focus on Zoe." "Agreed," Adrian said, "but we will have that conversation." When they reached the point where they would go their separate ways, Adrian to his private villa, and Naomi and Zoe to their suite in the main building, Zoe hugged Adrian tightly. "See you tomorrow, Daddy," she said. "Don't be late for snorkeling." "I wouldn't dream of it," Adrian promised. After they left, Adrian stood on the beach for a long time looking at the stars. His phone rang again. David, for the 10th time today. With a sigh, Adrian finally answered. "This better be important," he said. "Important? It's an emergency." David sounded frantic. "The Jenkins deal is falling apart. They're threatening to go with Morgan Tech if you don't personally attend the meeting on Thursday." Thursday? That was just 3 days away. Adrian would have to leave the Maldives tomorrow to make it back to New York in time. "Cancel it," Adrian said. "Cancel what? The meeting?" "All of it. The Jenkins deal, the meeting, whatever else is on my calendar for the next 2 weeks. I'm on vacation, David." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. In the 15 years David had worked for him, Adrian had never prioritized anything above the company. "But sir, this deal is worth billions," David finally said. "We've been working on it for months." "And we'll work on it when I get back," Adrian said firmly. "I've just discovered I have a daughter, David. I'm not leaving here until I've had a chance to get to know her." More silence then. "A daughter? Are you serious?" "Very. Her name is Zoe. She's 7 years old, and she's the most important deal I'll ever make. I'll call you in 2 weeks. Adrian hung up before David could respond. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making the right choice. The next morning, Adrian met Naomi, Lisa, and Zoe at the resort's dock, where a small boat was waiting to take them to a nearby reef for snorkeling. Zoe was bouncing with excitement, already wearing her life jacket. "Daddy, you came," she exclaimed when she saw him. "I promised, didn't I?" Adrian said, smiling at her enthusiasm. Naomi looked surprised to see him. "I half expected you to cancel," she admitted as they boarded the boat. "I know how busy you are." "Nothing is more important than this," Adrian said seriously. The boat took them to a shallow reef not far from the resort. The water was crystal clear, revealing colorful coral and fish below. The guide gave them brief instructions and helped Zoe with her mask and snorkel. "I'm a little scared," Zoe whispered to Adrian as they prepared to get into the water. "That's okay," Adrian said. "I'll be right next to you the whole time. You can hold my hand. Promise?" "Promise." Naomi watched them from the boat, a complex mix of emotions on her face. Adrian helped Zoe into the water, and true to his word, he stayed right beside her, holding her hand as they floated above the reef. Her initial fear quickly gave way to wonder as she spotted bright parrotfish, striped angelfish, and even a small reef shark swimming in the distance. When they returned to the boat, Zoe couldn't stop talking about everything they had seen. "Mommy, there was a fish with a blue face, and one that looked like it was wearing pajamas. Daddy showed me an octopus hiding in the rocks." "An octopus," Naomi corrected gently. "That sounds wonderful, honey." "It was the best day ever," Zoe declared. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" "We'll see," Naomi said. "We have that glass-bottom boat tour scheduled for tomorrow. Daddy can come too, right?" Zoe looked at Adrian with hopeful eyes. "If he wants to," Naomi said. "I want to," Adrian confirmed. As the days passed, Adrian spent every moment he could with Zoe and Naomi. They built more sandcastles, went on boat tours, swam in the resort's pool, and collected seashells along the beach. Lisa gradually warmed up to Adrian, though she remained protective of her sister and niece. Each night, Adrian would return to his villa and call David for a brief update on the company. Each time, David would try to convince him to return to New York, and each time Adrian would refuse. On their 5th day together, Adrian and Naomi finally found time to talk, while Zoe was attending a kids' activity at the resort with Lisa as her chaperone. They sat at a quiet bar overlooking the ocean, an awkward silence between them that had never existed during their relationship years ago. "She asks a lot of questions about you," Naomi finally said. "Where you live, what your house looks like, if you have any pets." "What do you tell her?" "The truth, as much as I know it," Naomi said. "That you live in a big apartment in New York, that you work very hard at your company, that you're very smart and successful." "But not that I didn't know about her," Adrian said. Naomi sighed. "No, not that. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that." "Why didn't you try harder to reach me, Naomi?" Adrian asked, the question that had been burning inside him since he discovered Zoe's existence. "You could have hired a lawyer, a private investigator, something." Naomi looked at him directly. "Because you made it very clear when we broke up that your company was your priority. You said, and I quote, 'I don't have room in my life for distractions right now.' That's what I was to you, Adrian. A distraction?" Adrian winced at hearing his own cruel words repeated back to him. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I was scared and stressed and wrong." "You broke my heart," Naomi said simply. "And then, when I found out I was pregnant, I tried to reach you, I really did. But after weeks of being blocked at every turn, I had to make a choice. I could spend my pregnancy fighting to get your attention, or I could focus on taking care of myself and our baby." She took a sip of her water before continuing. "And then, after Zoe was born, everything changed. I looked at her perfect little face and realized that maybe it was better this way. You had chosen your company over me. Why would you choose our daughter any differently?" The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. "That's not fair," he said, his voice tight. "You didn't give me the chance." "Didn't I?" Naomi challenged. "I called your office every day for weeks. I emailed you. I wrote letters. I even came to your building once when I was 5 months pregnant. Your security guards escorted me out like I was some crazy person." Adrian closed his eyes, remembering that period. He had instructed his team to keep Naomi away, to screen his calls and emails, to protect him from the pain of their breakup. He'd never imagined he was also cutting himself off from knowing his own child. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I was a coward. I was hurting, and I thought the easiest way to deal with it was to shut you out completely. It wasn't just me, you." "Shut out," Naomi said, softly. It was her too. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past heavy between them. "What happens now?" Adrian finally asked. "When we leave this island and go back to our real lives?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "I live in Boston. You live in New York. Zoe has school, friends, a whole life that doesn't include you." "I want it to include me," Adrian said firmly. "I've missed 7 years, Naomi. I'm not missing any more." "And how do you propose to make that work? Weekend visits, holiday arrangements?" "You run a multinational corporation, Adrian. You work 18-hour days. When exactly will you have time to be a father?" The question struck at Adrian's core. She was right. His life, as it currently existed, had no room for a child. "I'll make changes," he said. "I'll step back from day-to-day operations, promote David to COO, open a Boston office so I can be closer." Naomi looked skeptical. "Just like that? You'd change your whole life? For Zoe?" "Yes," Adrian said, without hesitation. "And for a chance to make things right with you." Naomi's expression softened slightly. "Adrian, I know," he interrupted. "I know it's too soon to talk about us. I know there's too much history, too much hurt. But I want you to know that I never stopped thinking about you, Naomi. I never stopped regretting what I did." Naomi looked away, blinking rapidly. "We should focus on Zoe right now. She's the priority." "Agreed," Adrian said. "But just so you know, you were never a distraction, Naomi. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too blind to see it." Before Naomi could respond, Lisa appeared. with Zoe, who ran to her parents with a paper crown on her head. "Look what I made," she exclaimed. "I'm the princess of the ocean." "You certainly are," Adrian said, grateful for the interruption. The conversation with Naomi had been heading into dangerous emotional territory. "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" Zoe asked, climbing onto the stool next to him. "They have 20 flavors." "If it's okay with your mum," Adrian said, looking at Naomi. Naomi nodded, still seeming affected by their conversation. "Just one scoop. We have dinner later." As they walked to the ice cream shop, Zoe between them holding both their hands, Adrian couldn't help but think how much they looked like a real family. The family they could have been if he hadn't made such a terrible mistake 8 years ago, and the family they might still become if he could find a way to earn back Naomi's trust and prove to her that he had changed. For now, though, he would focus on being the best father he could be to Zoe. Everything else would have to wait. The days passed quickly in paradise. Adrian spent every possible moment with Zoe, making up for lost time. Each day brought new discoveries. Zoe was allergic to strawberries, just like Adrian. She could wiggle her ears, a trick Adrian had mastered at her age. She had an uncanny ability with numbers, solving math problems far beyond her grade level without breaking a sweat. "She's definitely your daughter," Naomi commented one afternoon, as they watched Zoe meticulously constructing a complex sand fortress, complete with moats and bridges. That focus, that attention to detail, pure Adrian Knight. Adrian smiled, feeling pride swell in his chest. "She has your kindness, though, and your laugh." Their eyes met briefly before Naomi looked away. These moments had been happening more frequently. Small connections, lingering glances, conversations that edged toward the personal before one of them pulled back. The walls between them were slowly coming down, brick by brick. On their 8th day together, Adrian's phone rang during breakfast. It was David again. Adrian excused himself from the table where he had been eating with Naomi, Lisa, and Zoe. "This better be important," he said, when he was out of earshot. "It is," David assured him. "The Jenkins deal is completely dead, unless you're on a plane today. They won't negotiate with anyone but you, and they're meeting with Morgan Tech tomorrow." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking back at the table where Zoe was laughing. Had something Lisa had said. "I can't leave, David, I'm sorry. Sir, with all due respect, this deal represents almost 30% of our projected growth for the next fiscal year. The board is in panic mode. They're talking about emergency measures." "What kind of emergency measures?" Adrian asked, suddenly alert. "The kind that involve voting on your leadership," David said quietly. "They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Adrian felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had built Knight Innovations from nothing. But as the company had grown, he'd had to bring in investors. The board had always followed his lead before, but they had the power to remove him if they believed he wasn't acting in the company's best interests. "I'll video conference in for the meeting," Adrian said. "But I'm not leaving the Maldives, David, not yet." He hung up and returned to the table, trying to hide his concern. "Everything okay?" Naomi asked, noticing his expression. "Fine," Adrian replied. "Just some work stuff." "You're not leaving, are you, Daddy?" Zoe asked, her brown eyes wide with worry. Adrian's heart clenched at her fear. "No, sweetheart, I promised I'd stay for your whole vacation, remember? And I always keep my promises." Zoe's face brightened immediately. "Good, because today we're going to see the dolphins and you have to come." After breakfast, they boarded a boat that would take them to a lagoon where dolphins were known to gather. As they cruised through the crystal waters, Adrian pulled Naomi aside. "I need to handle a video conference tomorrow morning," he said quietly. "It's an emergency board meeting." Naomi looked concerned. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," Adrian said with more confidence than he felt. "But the board isn't happy about me extending my vacation and abandoning the Jenkins deal." "Adrian, if you need to go back—" "I don't," he interrupted firmly. "I made my choice and I'm sticking with it. Zoe comes first now." Naomi studied his face. "You really mean that, don't you?" "More than anything," Adrian said. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, thinking it would fill the emptiness I felt. But these past 8 days with Zoe, with both of you, have been the happiest of my life." Naomi's expression softened. "It's been good for her too, having you here." Before Adrian could respond, Zoe called out excitedly, "Dolphins! Look, Daddy! Look!" A pod of dolphins was swimming alongside their boat, leaping and playing in the wake. Zoe's face was alight with wonder, and Adrian quickly joined her at the railing, lifting her up so she could see better. "They're so beautiful," she breathed, her small hands gripping the rail tightly. "Yes, they are," Adrian agreed, but he was looking at his daughter, marveling at how quickly she had become the center of his world. The boat anchored in the lagoon, and their guide explained that they could swim with the dolphins if they wanted. Zoe immediately turned to Adrian. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" Adrian looked at Naomi, who nodded her approval. "As long as you stay with your father," she said. Soon Adrian and Zoe were in the water, wearing life jackets and holding onto a rope attached to the boat. The dolphins swam around them curiously, their sleek bodies gliding just beneath the surface. One dolphin, bolder than the rest, came right up to Zoe, nudging her gently with its snout. She giggled with delight, reaching out a tentative hand to touch it. "It's so soft," she exclaimed. Adrian watched her, memorizing every detail of this perfect moment. The joy on her face, the sun on the water, the feeling of her small hand in his as the dolphins circled them. This, he realized, was what he had been missing all these years. Not just Zoe, but this sense of connection, of purpose beyond making money and building his empire. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, Adrian sat on the beach alone, preparing for the board meeting that would happen at dawn due to the time difference with New York. He was so focused on his notes that he didn't hear Naomi approaching until she sat down beside him on the sand. "Lisa's watching Zoe," she explained. "I thought you might want some company." "Thanks," Adrian said, setting his tablet aside. "I could use a distraction from all this." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars reflect. "On the ocean, what will you tell the board tomorrow?" Naomi finally asked. Adrian sighed. "The truth, that I've discovered I have a daughter, and I'm taking time to get to know her. That family comes before business. And if they don't accept that, then they can find themselves a new CEO," Adrian said with a shrug. "I've made my decision, Naomi. Zoe comes first. Now nothing is going to change that." Naomi looked at him with surprise. "The Adrian Knight I knew would never have said that. Your company was everything to you." "The Adrian Knight you knew was a fool," he said quietly. "He let the best thing in his life walk away because he was too focused on success." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and for a moment it seemed like 8 years had never passed, like they were still the young couple who had fallen so deeply in love, before ambition and fear had torn them apart. "Adrian," Naomi began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "Don't say anything yet," he whispered. "Just hear me out, okay?" She nodded, and he took a deep breath. "I've never stopped loving you, Naomi, not for a single day. Breaking up with you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I've regretted it every day since. Finding out about Zoe, seeing what I missed, it's like waking up from a long, empty dream." He took her hands in his. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But if there's any part of you that still feels something for me, I'm asking you to consider giving us another try, not just for Zoe, but for us." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Adrian, it's not that simple. We're different people now. Our lives are completely separate. You live in New York, I live in Boston. You run a multinational corporation, I teach at a university." "Details," Adrian said, waving them away. "I told you, I'll open a Boston office. I'll step back from day-to-day operations. I'll do whatever it takes." "And what happens when the next big crisis hits at work, when you're faced with the same choice again?" Naomi asked, pulling her hands away. "How do I know you won't make the same decision?" "Because I've seen what I lost," Adrian said earnestly. "Because these past 8 days have shown me what really matters. Because I've finally realized that all the money and success in the world means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with." Naomi stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need time, Adrian. This is all happening so fast. 1 minute, you're a stranger. My daughter has only seen in pictures, and the next you're talking about us being a family." Adrian stood too, respecting her space. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. What about tomorrow, your board meeting? Like I said, they can find a new CEO if they don't like my priorities, Adrian said firmly. I'm done putting work first. Naomi smiled slightly. You really have changed. Having a daughter will do that to you, Adrian said, especially one as amazing as Zoe. She is pretty amazing, isn't she? Naomi said, her smile widening. She's perfect, Adrian agreed, and so is her mother. Naomi blushed in the moonlight. I should get back. Good night, Adrian. Good night, Naomi. As she walked away, Adrian felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know what the board would decide tomorrow, or whether Naomi would ever trust him with her heart again. But he knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened, his life had changed forever the moment Zoe had called him Daddy on this beach. The next morning, Adrian set up his laptop in his villa for the video conference. He wore a suit jacket over his vacation clothes, a concession to professionalism, even if his priorities had shifted. The board members' faces appeared on screen, their expressions ranging from concerned to angry. Adrian, this is highly irregular, said Eleanor Tate, the head of the board. Abandoning a major deal for a personal vacation is not the leadership we expect. I understand your concerns, Adrian said calmly. But I've recently discovered I have a 7-year-old daughter I never knew about. I'm taking this time to get to know her, and I won't apologize for that. There was a murmur of surprise from the board members. A daughter, Eleanor repeated. That's unexpected news. It was unexpected for me too, Adrian said with a small smile. But it's the best surprise of my life. We sympathize with your personal situation, said Richard Daniels, another board member. But the Jenkins deal represents almost a third of our projected growth. Your absence has put the entire company at risk. I've reviewed David's reports, Adrian countered. The deal isn't dead, it's delayed. Jenkins wants to negotiate with me personally, and I've arranged to meet with him when I return to New York next week. And if he goes with Morgan Tech before then? Richard challenged. Then we'll find another partner, Adrian said simply. There are other deals, other opportunities. But I only have one chance to build a relationship with my daughter. The board members exchanged glances. Adrian, Eleanor said carefully, while we respect your personal situation, we need to be sure your priorities are still aligned with the company's best interests. My priorities have changed, Adrian admitted. I won't pretend otherwise. Night Innovations is still important to me, but it's no longer the only thing in my life. I have a daughter now and she comes first. Richard leaned forward. Then perhaps it's time to discuss a transition of leadership. Adrian had expected this, but it still stung. If that's what you decide, I'll respect your decision. But before you vote, let me propose an alternative. He outlined his plan to promote David to COO, giving him more day-to-day control, while Adrian focused on strategy and major client relationships. He also proposed opening a Boston office, allowing him to spend more time near Zoe. This isn't about stepping back from the company, Adrian explained. It's about creating a better balance. I believe I can be both a good father and a good CEO. But if you disagree, I understand. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. You seem different, Adrian. I am different, he acknowledged. Finding out about Zoe has changed me. For the better, I think. After a lengthy discussion, the board agreed to give Adrian's plan a trial period. If the Jenkins deal fell through, or if the company's performance suffered, they would revisit the leadership question. Thank you for your faith in me, Adrian said as the meeting concluded. I won't let you down. As soon as the video conference ended, Adrian changed back into his vacation clothes and headed to meet Naomi and Zoe for breakfast. He found them at their usual table, Zoe waving excitedly when she saw him. Daddy, we saved you a seat. Adrian's heart warmed at her enthusiasm. No board meeting, no business deal could ever compare to the joy of hearing his daughter call him Daddy. How did it go? Naomi asked quietly as he sat down. Better than expected, Adrian replied. They're giving me a chance to prove I can balance work and family. And can you? Naomi asked, her expression serious. I'm sure going to try, Adrian said. I've already set things in motion to open a Boston office. Naomi's eyes widened. You were serious about that? I'm serious about everything I said last night, Adrian assured her. Every word. Before Naomi could respond, Zoe tugged on Adrian's sleeve. Daddy, can we go to the aquarium today? They have sharks. Absolutely, Adrian said, turning his attention to his daughter. I love sharks. Me too, Zoe exclaimed. Mommy says I know more shark facts than anyone in my class. As Zoe launched into an impressive list of shark facts, Adrian caught Naomi watching them with a soft expression. When their eyes met, she didn't look away this time, and Adrian felt a surge of hope. They spent the day at the resort's marine center, where Zoe marveled at the sharks, rays, and colorful reef fish in the large aquariums. Adrian soaked in every moment, taking dozens of photos and videos to preserve these memories. That evening, they had dinner on the beach at a special table set up just for the three of them. Lisa had decided to join a night snorkeling excursion, giving Adrian, Naomi, and Zoe time alone together. Under the stars, with tiki torches providing soft light and the sound of waves as their background music, they almost felt like a real family. Zoe chatted happily about everything they had seen and done during their vacation, while Adrian and Naomi exchanged small smiles across the table. After dinner, they walked along the shoreline, Zoe running ahead to collect seashells in the moonlight. Don't go too far, Naomi called after her. I won't, Mommy, Zoe promised, but her excitement kept pulling her forward. With Zoe distracted by her shell hunting, Adrian and Naomi had another moment alone. I meant what I said about opening a Boston office, Adrian said. I've already instructed David to start looking at properties. Naomi shook her head in amazement. You really are serious about this, aren't you? More serious than I've ever been about anything, Adrian confirmed. I want to be in Zoe's life, Naomi. Every day, not just on weekends or holidays. And what about us? Naomi asked softly. Where do we fit into this plan of yours? Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. That depends on you. I know what I want. I want us to be a family, a real family. But I understand if that's asking too much after everything that happened. Naomi looked out at the ocean, gathering her thoughts. When we broke up, I was devastated. I thought you were the love of my life, and then suddenly you were choosing your company over me. It took me years to get over that pain. She glanced toward Zoe, who was examining a large shell further down the beach. And then I found out I was pregnant and everything changed. Suddenly it wasn't about me anymore, or us, or the pain you caused. It was about this tiny person growing inside me who needed me to be strong. Naomi turned back to Adrian, her eyes shining with tears in the moonlight. Being a mother changed me, Adrian. It made me stronger, more certain of what matters. And seeing you with Zoe these past days, seeing how much you love her already, how willing you are to change your entire life for her, it's made me see you differently too. Adrian held his breath, afraid to hope, but unable to stop himself. I can't promise you anything right now, Naomi continued. There's too much history between us, too much hurt, but I'm willing to try, for Zoe's sake, and maybe for ours too. It was more than Adrian had dared to hope for. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to show you that I've changed, that I can be the man you and Zoe deserve. Mommy, Daddy, look what I found, Zoe called, running toward them with a large conch shell. They quickly wiped away their tears and turned toward their daughter, both smiling broadly. It's beautiful, honey, Naomi said, examining the shell. Can I keep it? Zoe asked. Of course, Adrian said. It'll be a memory of our first vacation together. Zoe beamed up at him. Our first? So there will be more. Adrian looked at Naomi, who gave him a small nod. Many more, he promised. As many as you want. Zoe threw her arms around Adrian's waist, hugging him tightly. I'm so glad you're my daddy, she said. Adrian felt his heart swell almost painfully in his chest. He looked over Zoe's head at Naomi, who was watching them with tears in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. In that moment, standing on the beach with his daughter's arms around him and the woman he loved looking at him with new hope in her eyes, Adrian knew he had made the right choice. The business deals, the board meetings, the corporate success, none of it mattered compared to this. He had found what he had been searching for all along, right here on this beach. With the two people who had become his whole world in just a matter of days, the future was uncertain. There would be challenges to face, arrangements to make, trust to rebuild. But for now, under the stars with the sound of waves washing against the shore, Adrian Knight was exactly where he belonged. With his family, their last 2 days in paradise, passed in a blur of sunshine, laughter, and precious moments, Adrian treasured each second, knowing that reality waited for them back home. Their perfect bubble couldn't last forever. On their final evening, the resort arranged a special sunset dinner on the beach for them. Tiki torches lined a path to a table set for 4, Adrian, Naomi, Zoe, and Lisa, positioned perfectly to watch the sun sink into the ocean. "I don't want to go home tomorrow," Zoe said, pouting as she pushed her dessert around her plate. "I want to stay here with Daddy forever." Adrian and Naomi exchanged glances. They had talked about how to handle the transition back to real life, but they hadn't yet explained everything to Zoe. "Sweetie," Naomi began gently, "we talked about this. Vacation has to end. You have school, and I have work, and Daddy has to go back to New York," Zoe finished, her brown eyes filling with tears. "And we'll never see him again." "That's not true," Adrian said quickly, reaching across the table to take her small hand. "Not at all. It's not." Zoe looked up hopefully. "No, sweetheart," Adrian assured her. "Actually, your mom and I have been talking, and we have some news for you." Zoe straightened in her chair, suddenly alert. "Good news or bad?" "News? Good news," Naomi said, smiling. "Very good news." Adrian took a deep breath. "I'm going to be opening a new office for my company in Boston. That means I'll be living in the same city as you and your mom." Zoe's eyes widened. "Really? Forever?" "Forever," Adrian confirmed. "I'll have an apartment there and you can visit me whenever you want. And I'll be able to come to your school events and take you to the park and do all the things that daddies and daughters do together." Zoe jumped up from her chair and ran around the table, throwing herself into Adrian's arms. "This is the best news ever," she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. Over Zoe's head, Adrian's eyes met Naomi's. They had spent many late nights discussing arrangements after they returned home. Adrian had been true to his word, already putting plans in motion to establish a significant presence in Boston. He had even looked at apartments near Naomi's neighborhood. "There's more," Naomi said, her voice gentle. "Your daddy and I are going to be spending time together too." Zoe pulled back from Adrian, looking between her parents with growing excitement. "Like dating?" Adrian chuckled at her directness. "Yes, like dating. We're going to take things slowly, but we both want to see if we can be a family together." "I knew it," Zoe exclaimed triumphantly. "I told Aunt Lisa you were going to fall in love again." Lisa, who had been quietly observing, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, did you now? And what exactly did you tell me, little Miss Matchmaker?" Zoe grinned. "I said that Mommy still keeps Daddy's picture by her bed, and that means she still loves him. And Daddy looks at Mommy the same way Prince Charming looks at Cinderella in my book." Adrian and Naomi both blushed while Lisa laughed. "Out of the mouths of babes," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." They all clinked glasses, even Zoe with her fruit juice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Adrian looked around at the 3 women who had so unexpectedly become the most important people in his life. Lisa, who had gone from suspicious protector to cautious ally. Zoe, his daughter, the little girl who had captured his heart completely in just 10 days. And Naomi, the woman he had never stopped loving, who was willing to give him a second chance despite everything. He had come to this island a lonely man, running from his past. He would leave it with a future brighter than he could have ever imagined. Later that night, after Zoe and Lisa had gone to bed, Adrian and Naomi walked along the beach one last time. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and the warm breeze carried the scent of tropical flowers. "Are you nervous?" Adrian asked, his fingers laced with Naomi's. "About trying again?" Naomi nodded. "Terrified, actually. There's so much at stake now. It's not just us anymore, it's Zoe too." "I know," Adrian said. "That's what scares me the most. The thought of disappointing her, of disappointing you again." Naomi stopped walking and turned to face him. "Then don't," she said simply. "Be the man I always knew you could be. The man I've seen these past 10 days. Adrian pulled her closer. "I promise," he whispered. "I won't let either of you down again." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, Adrian leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and gentle, a promise of new beginnings rather than a rekindling of old passions. When they broke apart, Naomi's eyes were shining. "I've missed you," she admitted. "Even when I was angry at you, even when I thought I hated you, there was always a part of me that missed you." "I've missed you too," Adrian said. Every day for 8 years, they continued their walk in comfortable silence, both contemplating the journey ahead. It wouldn't be easy. They were different people now, with different lives and different responsibilities. But they had Zoe, their perfect, beautiful daughter, and they had this second chance. Adrian was determined not to waste it. The next morning brought the inevitable departure. As they checked out of the resort, Adrian couldn't help but glance back at the beach where their lives had changed forever. This place would always be special to him, the place where he had found his daughter and where he had found his way back to Naomi. "We'll come back," Naomi said, reading his thoughts. "Maybe for Zoe's birthday next year." "I'd like that," Adrian said. The journey back to reality was long. First a boat to the main island, then a seaplane to the airport, then the long flight to the United States. Zoe fell asleep on the private jet, her head on Adrian's lap, and her feet on Naomi's. The adults talked quietly, finalizing plans for the coming weeks. "I'll need about a month to get everything set up in Boston," Adrian said. "David's already found office space, and I've got a real estate agent looking at apartments." "And the board is okay with all this?" Naomi asked. "They're coming around," Adrian said. "I've assured them I'm not abandoning the company, just restructuring my role, and I've promised to salvage the Jenkins deal when I get back to New York." "Speaking of which," Lisa chimed in from across the aisle, "what exactly is your plan for the next few weeks?" "With Zoe, I mean." It was a good question. They had discussed the long-term arrangements, but not the immediate transition. "I need to go back to New York tomorrow," Adrian admitted. "Just for a week or two, to handle the Jenkins situation and start the transition with David. After that, I'll come to Boston every weekend until the office is ready." "And when you're in New York," Lisa pressed, "what about Zoe?" "We can FaceTime every night," Adrian said, "and I'll call her every morning before school." Lisa nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Adrian knew he still had to earn her trust, and he respected her protective instincts toward Naomi and Zoe. When they finally landed in Boston, Adrian felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Their vacation bubble was officially over, but their real life together was just beginning. A car was waiting to take Lisa, Naomi, and Zoe home, while another would take Adrian to his hotel. He would stay overnight before flying to New York, the E. Next day, "Do you have to go, Daddy?" Zoe asked, her eyes welling up with tears as they stood on the tarmac. Adrian knelt down to her level. "Just for a little while, Princess, but I'll call you every day and I'll be back next weekend, and then before you know it, I'll be living right here in Boston." "Promise?" Zoe asked, holding out her pinky finger. "Promise," Adrian said solemnly, linking his pinky with hers. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Zoe threw her arms around his neck. "I love you, Daddy." The words, so simple and so profound, nearly brought Adrian to his knees. "I love you too, Zoe. More than anything in the world." As Zoe climbed into the car with Lisa, Adrian turned to Naomi. "And I love you," he said softly. "I know we're taking things slowly, but I needed to say it." Naomi touched his face gently. "I know. And I'm getting there. Just be patient with me." "I've waited 8 years," Adrian said. "I can wait a little longer." They shared a brief kiss goodbye, and then Naomi joined Zoe and Lisa in the car. Adrian watched them drive away, already counting the days until he could return to Boston. The next 2 weeks were hectic. Adrian spent most of his time in New York, working with David on the transition plan and meeting with Jenkins to salvage the important deal. His nights and early mornings were dedicated to Zoe, with FaceTime calls where they talked about her school, her friends, and all the things they would do when he moved to Boston. True to his word, Adrian flew to Boston every weekend. He and Naomi took Zoe to the aquarium, the children's museum, and her favorite playground. They had dinner together, the three of them, and Adrian got to experience the everyday moments of parenthood, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, mediating. When Zoe insisted she didn't need a bath, by the third weekend, Naomi invited him to stay in her guest room rather than at a hotel. It was a small step, but a significant one. "It makes more sense," she said practically. "You'll be here more often, and this way you can have breakfast with Zoe before school on Monday." But Adrian noticed the way she watched him with Zoe, the softening in her eyes when he patiently helped their daughter with a difficult math problem or made her laugh with silly faces. They were building something together day by day, moment by moment. 1 month after their return from the Maldives, Adrian moved to Boston permanently. His new apartment was just 5 blocks from Naomi's house, close enough for convenience, but far enough to give them space as they navigated their new relationship. The Knight Innovations Boston office opened with a small ceremony that Naomi and Zoe attended. Adrian gave a speech about expanding horizons and new beginnings, his eyes finding his daughter in the audience. "Sometimes life surprises you," he told the gathered employees and press. "Sometimes you think you know exactly what you want, only to discover that what you really need has been waiting for you all along." It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were arguments and adjustments, moments of doubt and fear. Adrian struggled with balancing his new priorities, sometimes falling back into workaholic habits that made Naomi worry. Naomi had to learn to share parenting decisions, to make room in their lives for Adrian, after so many years of it being just her and Zoe. And Zoe, despite her initial excitement, sometimes felt insecure about the changes, worried that this new arrangement wouldn't last, that her father might disappear again. But they worked through each challenge together. When Adrian missed Zoe's school play because of an unavoidable work crisis, he made it up to her with an elaborate apology and a promise to do better, a promise he kept by rearranging his entire schedule to ensure he never missed an important event again. When Naomi hesitated about letting Zoe stay overnight at Adrian's apartment, they talked it through, addressing her fears and concerns until she felt comfortable with the arrangement. 6 months after their fateful meeting on the beach, Adrian took Naomi back to the Maldives for a weekend, just the two of them. Zoe stayed with Lisa, who had become Adrian's strongest ally once she saw how dedicated he was to being a good father and partner. They stayed in the same resort, walked on the same beach, sat under the same stars. But everything else had changed. "I have something for you," Adrian said on their last night, as they sat on the sand not far from where they had first seen each other again. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Naomi's eyes widened. "This isn't a proposal," Adrian said quickly. "Not yet. I know we're not ready for that." Naomi relaxed slightly as he opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small sapphire. "It's a promise ring," Adrian explained. "The stone is the same color as the ocean here, where our new beginning started. It's a promise that I'm in this forever, you, me, and Zoe. A promise that I'll never walk away again." Naomi took the ring, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You don't have to wear it," Adrian said. "I'll understand if you think it's too soon." Naomi looked at him, her expression soft in the moonlight. "It's not too soon," she said, slipping the ring onto her right hand. "We've actually been doing this for a long time, haven't we? Since the day Zoe was born. We just didn't know it yet." Adrian pulled her close, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "I love you, Naomi Carter." "I love you too, Adrian Knight," she replied, the words he had been waiting to hear for so long. As they kissed under the stars, Adrian thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this beach months ago, how he had tried to run from his past, only to find his future waiting for him. 1 year to the day after their reunion, Adrian did propose on the same beach where Zoe had first called him Daddy. This time, he brought both Naomi and Zoe to the Maldives, making it a family vacation. He had arranged for a sandcastle builder to create an elaborate structure on the beach, a replica of the first one he and Zoe had built together. In the center of the castle's courtyard was a small box containing an engagement ring, "Look, Mommy. There's something inside," Zoe exclaimed, pointing to the box. Naomi looked at Adrian, who smiled and got down on one knee in the sand. "Naomi Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "You have given me the two greatest gifts in the world, our daughter and a second chance at love. Will you make me the happiest man alive and marry me?" "Say yes, Mommy," Zoe urged, jumping up and down with excitement. "Yes," Naomi said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to kiss her as Zoe cheered. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony on a different beach, this one in Cape Cod, closer to home. Zoe was the flower girl, though she informed everyone. She was actually the family maker, because she had brought her parents back together. As Adrian and Naomi shared their first dance as husband and wife, Adrian caught sight of his daughter watching them with pure happiness on her face. He remembered the moment of panic he had felt on that beach in the Maldives, when he had first spotted Naomi and tried to run away. How different his life would be if he had succeeded in escaping that day. How empty, how incomplete. Instead, he had found everything he never knew he was looking for: a family, a love rekindled, and a little girl who had recognized him as Daddy before he even knew that's who he was meant to be. Sometimes life's greatest treasures were found in the moments we least expected, Adrian reflected as he held his wife close. Sometimes the things we ran from were exactly the things we needed most, and sometimes the most beautiful secrets were revealed right there on the sand, the end.